Once upon a time, there was an undefined, indescribable, non-distinct emptiness, and then suddenly, there was form. In an explosive flash, energy, light, definition, description, and distinction came into being. A vast, infinite, unified expanse of time, space, and materials began to take shape, shifting, morphing, transmuting, and evolving. Billions of years later, in a teeny solar system within a small galaxy known as the Milky Way, in a minuscule portion of the universe, our story, the story of mankind, began. And so the table was set for a contextualization within. A prospective explorer, endowed with intelligence and self-reflection, could face a great unknown and begin to ask questions of who, what, when, where, why, and how. And thus, philosophy was born. A peculiar circumstance wherein a man could intellectually question the nature of existence. But for man to just intellectually ask questions was not enough. For philosophy without empirical exploration only led to superstition. For man to gain any clarity or understanding of his context, he needed to seek evidence that could be confirmed through a medium of exploratory experience. Hence, the two major fields of applied philosophy were established. Extrospection, the science of materials, and introspection, the science of awareness. Now, of course, the work of both these philosophically driven subsets of the exploration of mystery would not be easy. There would be opposition and resistance from the stubborn superstitions that solidified into dogma that would later become religions. For the explorers of mystery, resistance from religion was the least of their problems, for religion sought not only to oppose, but to put the explorers of mystery to death. Some people may classify these acts as senseless, but actually they make perfect sense. Whereas the sciences of materials and awareness are enforced by experiential empirical evidence, superstition can be enforced only through fear, violence, and intimidation. Time passed, and the world became more civilized, to where now the sciences of awareness and materials have become grounded foundations that can be explored openly without fear of annihilation. And so, here we are in the present day, where a lone, modern-day philosopher named Meta-Sage roams the same well-trodden paths as the philosophers of the days of yonder, continuing the endless search for meaning in the meaningless. And so this is where the narrative continues.
Being a contemporary explorer of mystery myself, it's kind of disappointing to see that a sort of divide between the sciences of extrospection and introspection has developed. This has often been framed in polarity paradigms of East versus West, physical versus metaphysical, spirituality versus materialism. The explorers of extrospection assert that awareness is a byproduct of materials, whereas the explorers of introspection assert that materials are a byproduct of awareness. And so this begs the question, does it have to be just one or the other? Isn't it possible that more than likely it's a combination of both? So of course this raises the question, is there really any such thing as duality? Or is there just an illusion of duality within a wholeness where there are no separations or distinctions? So then what exactly is non-duality? Some may say that it is everything, but if it's whole, unified, infinite, unseparated, and has no distinctions, can it really be called anything? Or is the everything really just a nothing? These are the questions that modern-day explorers of mystery should be asking. Would it surprise you if the seemingly separate paths of extrospection science and introspection science led to the same destination? Would it surprise you if they both came to the same conclusion? And would it surprise you if mankind's explorations into quantum physics is what eventually leads to this unification? And what if all the implications of quantum physics turn out to be temporary aspects of functionality? That consciousness affects the behavior of subatomic particles. That particles move in all directions in time and space, in all possible places at once. The universe is splitting into a multitude of parallel universes. And the universe is interconnected with faster-than-light transfers of information. These are all certainly fascinating questions, but still, they are questions addressing the inner workings of distinctions. So what are the ultimate questions? In philosophy, it used to be, what's the meaning of life? But I think it's safe to say that philosophically this is an outmoded question. For how can there be any objective meaning when meanings are assigned by relative subjective perspectives? So for me, more relevant ultimate questions would be, what's the common foundational essence that all things break down into and all things share in common? What is the source of this foundational essence? And what exactly is aware of all this? So I decided to pose these questions to a variety of different people of varying perspectives, mainly to people with positions rooted in philosophy, wisdom, science, spirituality, atheism, and intellectualism. So I posed the questions, and this is what they said.
It is a remarkable story, the source of all things, of being and nothingness, only a partial history of a part of what constitutes the mind, the sum of its parts, the interconnectedness we share with all matter. This includes the universe and everything in it. Consciousness means together to know. That is the source of all things. Knowledge, shared knowledge, the interconnectedness of all things, living or not, sensing and not sensing things. Life began in primordial pools, churning self-interested organisms, banging protozoans, catching rays of sun on shallow pool rocks. Evolution progressed. Fish inhabited the same pools. Now closer where the pool rocks once existed, stands a man talking to you. Interconnectedness is the source of all things. It is the miracle of consciousness. I am the perfect past, present, and future happening now. You were there. You've experienced the same moment with me. Interconnectedness. And through this interconnectedness, we are self-aware. Awareness is made possible by half of a quintillion neuron bridge connections. Bits of organic tree branches run across our bodies. Billions of neuron cells make our senses possible. This was the evolution and the birth of consciousness. The awareness of sentio ergo sum is therefore the mind, and the minding is an excitingly significant event. Amoebas turn away from light, bacteria dance to the beat of their own drum. The monitor snaps at the mouse and eats it. My pupil contracts while I sleep. A blind person makes the ball aware of its presence by acknowledging its presence. The ball becomes, therefore, meaningful. This is awareness. The fundamental essence is what holds everything together. It is the nothingness that gives us something so grand, so beautiful, and that is a thought. Sentio ergo sum. I feel, therefore I am. What is real because I sense it. This is all brought to you by nothingness.
The reality is that matter and energy cannot be created nor destroyed. It can only change forms. So it's more than reasonable to believe that whatever the singularity or the source that this universe came into existence from came from something else. Now we can't look past that point, and there's no way for us to measure past that point in the time-space continuum. But it stands to reason that, since matter and energy cannot be created nor destroyed, that all of this that exists in the universe, even if it was tightly compressed into the space of an atom, existed before that. So there is no source of all things. All the matter, all the energy existed before in some other form, for eternity. So everything that is, always was, and will always be in some form in the future. Even if the universe comes a cold, lifeless, dark place, all that matter and energy will still exist in some form. Awareness is an emergent quality of the brain, and it's just a part of our whole. Just as our hand and our feet, our muscles, our bone, our organs, you could cut your hand off and you wouldn't think that that hand is you, but it is part of you, and if you didn't have that hand, you would be you without a hand. So your entire body is you. You're not just a driver driving this body. Although the awareness makes you feel like that, you need to consider that there is no mystical spirit inside your body that runs you. It's your brain that runs you. And studies show that if an individual gets brain damage or Alzheimer's, it changes the personality. It changes their perception of the world. It changes their perception of themselves and their concept of the world. So your awareness is a neural network inside your brain that contains your identity. And when you die, it rots away. It doesn't just go somewhere else. You are your brain. The fundamental essence isn't a spirit inside your body. It isn't the emergent quality of consciousness. If you're looking into the fundamental essence of life, it has to be the carbon cell. Everything about us is made up of the carbon cell. All life as we know it on Earth is made of carbon living cells, which contain DNA. And even single-celled microorganisms show a certain amount of intelligence and the ability to consume and reproduce, to find the food and to procreate itself. If you're wanting to find a fundamental essence of the universe, then I guess you would have to look into matter and energy, because at a certain level all matter and energy is interchangeable. It cannot be created nor destroyed, but it can change forms. So taking it to that level, the atomic level or the subatomic level, the modern theory now is M theory or string theory, that there's little vibrating strings that are smaller than subatomic particles that make up the subatomic particles, which make up the atomic particles in which the universe is made of. But the fundamental essence of life is information carried in DNA by the carbon cell.
The most simplest answer that I can give is, in the beginning there was a thought. In the beginning there was an awareness. Awareness created thought. Thought manifested into matter. And existence was born. All of it came from an awareness. The awareness is present in everything. And we're all made up of the stuff that that thought came from. That's the simplest answer that I can give. What is the common fundamental substance that all things break down into? Awareness. Awareness. Everything comes from the void. Everything that is manifested came from a realm of unmanifested potential. That realm is infinite. The realm of manifested potential is infinite. And awareness is infinite. What is the source of this fundamental substance? And who exactly is aware of this? If I were to bring it all the way to the average man walking down the street and set him in the course of this story, he is right in the course of this story because he is a product of the infinite potential that manifested into matter that eventually brought upon our existence. Is he aware of it? He's not aware of it because the source of all that is, the awareness, the divine spark, would have been boring if it experienced the potential for existence as just one thing. So therefore, the potential is infinite. That's why every human being is different, every experience is different. Us as human beings, all we are is little pieces of God playing hide and seek with ourselves. And what I mean by that is we are God, literally God, awareness, playing hide and seek from itself. You know why? Because it's fun. Bottom line. It would be boring just to sit there and do nothing. So we play games. The purpose of existence on earth? To seek God, to find God. The funny part is, where is God hidden? Right here the whole time. But you know, we're born with that uncanny, that little dinger of forgetting whatever happened before we got here and not being aware of what happens when we leave here. So that makes the situation a little more complicated, but if it wasn't complicated, it wouldn't be fun. If it wasn't complicated, we wouldn't try everything. So in closing, that is my summary. Thanks for watching. Love, peace, and blessings.
The source of all things is the creative advance into novelty. Forget gravity, forget electromagnetism, forget mind and matter. The basic principle of the universe is habit and novelty. Novelty becomes enshrined as habit, which forms a foundation for new and ever more complex forms of novelty. It's this constant feedback loop. See, the universe is not a clock. It's not something you wind up at the beginning and then it unfolds in this predictable mechanistic manner. No, instead it's an organism. It grows and evolves and seeks new experiences. Now, awareness is experience folding back upon itself. You can have a lifetime of experience without ever being aware. There's a recursive perspective upon perspective upon perspective that involves this otherizing of self, so that the self that is reflecting is a new self from the one that's being reflected upon. So there's this constant multiplication of selves, this Ouroboros-like pattern of trying to chase its own tail and get at its own essence. Now, what is the fundamental essence? There is no essence. All things exist in relation to other things, is what the Mahayana Buddhists refer to as dependent origination. There are simply conjunctive and disjunctive relations of different degrees between all things. Objects are simply comprised of their consequent relations to other things, and specifically to the subject, the apprehended. The subject, in turn, is comprised of the historicity of relations between objects and with other subjects, so that we embody our interactions with other people in our own subjectivity. Matter, in turn, is energy, as we know. And energy is simply a relation between objects. But since objects themselves are merely relations, what we have is this never-ending recursive matrix of relations between relations between relations, in which there is no ground.
I've come to accept the fact that this definition is more than likely to change. That the more that I grow and understand the mysteries of this world, more likely it's to change. It was something else in the past. More than likely it'll change in the future, but for the sake of the video, I'll break it down for you all. Now, I was born and raised in a Christian Pentecostal church, so from that experience I learned that the religion itself puts the human form and those who are Christian in particular on a pedestal. And there's no sense of equilibrium or a sense of equality with all the rest of God's creation. So I decided to branch out from that and to see the world from my own perspective, my own eyes, And what I've learned currently is that there's one term that I find unifies everything for me just perfectly, and that's awareness. Some people can call it spirit, some people call it consciousness. Everyone has a different way of identifying it, but some call it God, But awareness works really well for me. From dismantling the Christian perspective, awareness seeks to level the playing field, and it seeks to establish a sense of equilibrium that I haven't really found with any sort of religion. I looked at Buddhism, Hinduism, and Christianity, and I really haven't found that sense of wholeness that I get from awareness. Because awareness seeks to understand, or at least awareness, it helps me to understand my place in the world. It helps me to acknowledge the different relationships that I have with the various other forms, the various manifestations of awareness, and it helps me to enhance those relationships. Because when one really looks at it from the Christian perspective, it's really fragmented and broken. There is no acknowledgement of the relationships between man and animal or plants, and that which is unknown and mysterious is considered demonic. But with awareness, it seeks to encompass everything and include it within the whole, because when you look at it from awareness, that which is unknown is a part of it, and that which was unknown to me in the past, like the various relationships between man and woman, man and animal, animal and plants, man and plants, the inorganic, the inanimate, all of these various elements which I haven't acknowledged before are little by little becoming known. So the more that I grow and expand, so too does that definition of awareness, and it's a bit more free flowing and than it is restrictive. Everyone's free to decide whether or not they to either adopt this belief or not. But what I found is that not many people choose to carry on this burden. I look at it as though that one's laboring for the species, or laboring for awareness itself, awareness seeking to understand itself. And everyone's free to make the choice, But what I've decided is that if I learn this and I share my findings with everyone else, they'll share that findings and they'll expand upon it. It's more than likely to lead to a place where understanding and the enjoyment of the mystery is prized and honored, And I feel that that's something which I can pass on to future generations.
I think it's a good idea to make a distinction between the cosmos and the universe. I would define the universe as whole and complete, the totality of all possibilities. And the cosmos is that which we experience directly, qualitatively and quantitatively, as well as all of our symbolic mapping, mathematics and linguistics and all that stuff. I think that the cosmos is inherently both predictable statistically perhaps and unpredictable. And so the attempt at humanity to try to create a politics and the illusion of authority is the attempt to try to make things more predictable. I think ultimately it is anarchism that is the dominant factor, actually. And the attempts to create the illusion of authority is creating far too much stress in our biology. And also I think that an interesting aspect of this is that the current trend toward math and science and investigation of natural reality through natural sciences is requiring people to live within this social fiction. Otherwise it would all fall apart. I also think, sort of pessimistically, that we are not smart enough on a massive scale to continue rearranging reality at the subatomic level or chemical level or genetic level especially. I don't think that as a species we're ready to reorganize reality, and I think biosphere and all of our variety are going to suffer as a result. So adjusting to civilization is a bad idea.
The world in which we live is pure consciousness. It is the substance of reality. Everything else is a product of consciousness. Your mind is a product of your consciousness. It is a creation, because the universe exists because of your creation. The greater you is all that exists, the source of everything, the creator of all your mind, your emotions, and the material world. You create inside your mind an interpretation of this world, and this world is virtual. It is like a mental matrix in which you create judgment and you sort reality, and you say this thing is bad, this thing is good, and you use your mental abilities to sort things, but the reality is in fact neutral to all these categories, because categories do not exist. There is no such thing as category A of people or category B of people. This is all virtual. This is inside your mind, which are manifestation of the consciousness itself, which is a unified consciousness. And the universe is splitting itself into various manifestations as a creation, and this universe is you, it's me. It is not separated from anything. And this creative energy creates all the mental energy, all the emotional energy, and all the material world. This is our own existence, and we must accept reality as it is, because the judgments we create are causing the suffering in your life. What exists is consciousness, emotion, the material world, but there are no separate, discrete entities. It is just a unified field, and this field is fundamentally conscious, because nothing exists outside consciousness. You've never perceived something outside of your consciousness, and everything you perceive is inside your consciousness, because the world you observe with your eyes When you look at something with your eyes, what you see here is inside of you, and it is all that exists. The universe exists because you created it as the greater you. The you that existed before the birth of yourself in the human form. The you that is me. The you that is every animal, everything, every emotions, all the dreams you have when you sleep. Everything in consciousness is you. But sometimes we feel separation, and this separation is an illusion created by our judgments. Because we use the mental tool as a mean for judgment and a mean of self-identification. But this is a false self. The reality itself is only one self, and it is consciousness. So do not judge, just look at life as it is and live in the present moment. The present moment is eternal. This is where everything is, and this is where consciousness is experimented.
The only thing I can share on subjects such as these, or the only thing I can share at all, is information or words that I feel can help you. You know, someone asks me a question, and I want to give them the best answer to that question. Even if it means not answering the question, and telling them that the question doesn't even matter. You know, everyone's free, and no one can really control another person's thoughts. They can only guide them in a certain way that they think will help them most, you know? And I think it would be most beneficial to all people not to worry about these questions, and not to worry about what the source of all of this is, you know, and like what is the fundamental essence of all things. Deeper exploration into the mind isn't going to bring forth anything that is more true without the mind. If anything, using your mind is like skewing your experience of the answers to these questions. Going through your mind to look for the answer makes you think that the answer is in the form of like a thought that the mind can even comprehend. But I don't think that that's really how it fits together. That's not how it works. Having like mentally deep thoughts sort of creates the illusion that you are having a deep experience, even though your experience is only that of those thoughts, still within your mind, in that little bubble that the mind exists in, which separates itself from everything else, you know? In reality, there isn't any need to communicate those things, you know? I know that everyone else is within the same thing that I'm feeling, you know? They can all feel it too. There's no need to define it, and I think attempting to define it causes issues, you know? To the point of war and at least argument. And it's not necessary to argue over these things, really, you know? Like, understanding these answers to these questions through your mind and through some form of language within your mind that you can actually, like, spit back out to other people and they can hear it, you know? And it's like, wow, everyone understands this explanation of these answers. Even understanding that is not very deep, you know? It's not actually feeling it. Like, I can read many books about performing a certain action, study it and study it and study it, and learn all the parts, all the names of every step and everything like that. But it doesn't change the way that doing that thing feels when I finally do it.
So the first question is, what's the common foundational essence that all things break down into and all share in common? Ontologically, this is an extremely redundant question because being foundational entails being basic, and basic is one of the core principles of something being an essence or a substance. So a foundational essence is essentially what is the basic of the basic. It's also poorly worded because talking of things breaking down into such a substance is essentially saying, what is the foundations of all things foundation? Since I'm a naturalist, I'll reword the question of its redundancy and strip it of its redundancy and make it so that it applies to me. According to naturalism, what is substance? I think that's a more fair question. Ontologically, I respond thusly. A substance is that which can be found parallel in all empirical theories. So we'd say the space in a neutron, as explained by the most accurate theories that we have in physics. That would be a substance. The thing is, the foundational substance is foundational and a substance at the same time. I know that's redundant. Because it is independent of all things, and all other things that we think of are simply rearrangements of more of this substance. And metaphysically, this carries with it a problem in answering the second question, which is, what is the source of this foundational essence? To ask the source is to imply causation of the substance, and a substance, ontologically, has no cause. If there were a cause, then that cause would in fact be the foundational substance, not the substance that I originally referenced. So in essence, my reply would be there isn't one, according to all the science that I'm aware of. The third question is, what exactly is aware of all this? Which kind of confuses me, because metaphysically, I don't see the significance of asking that kind of a question. I mean, there's a sort of an inherent triviality in asking what is aware of what. Depending on your perspective, you could paint the universe as being aware of itself because we are a part of the universe and we have awareness and we're aware. And so, you know, but in that case, I really wouldn't consider awareness to be all that special because it's be simply something that is built into the universe. And at that point, what exactly are we calling what? When we're saying what individually is aware. You know, I'm going off on a tangent. I would say that the answer to this question is nobody, to the best of my knowledge. Nobody and nothing is completely aware of this, even myself. I must remain tentative in my answers because there's always the possibility that I could be wrong in naming the substance that I name. I personally have never seen the empty space in a neutron particle, but, you know, I can still trust the physicists who are building the empirical theories upon this particular definition of a substance. But to declare outright complete correctness ontologically, I think, is almost to beg for groundless speculation, and we kind of leave that sort of grounding for the religious.
Consciousness or self-awareness is, of course, an emergent property of the brain. I think that this comes about via a combination of many different stimuli, external and internal, that all come together to create something unique. And your brain is constantly bombarded with all of this information, and it interprets it and creates a picture of your environment around you. Some examples of these many different stimuli would be your eyes detecting light or even feeling pain. In the field of psychology, there is what is called the duplex mind. It is made up of the conscious system and the automatic system. The automatic system would be those functions of your body that operate while you are asleep. You can still feel pain when you are asleep, and you can also hear an alarm clock when you are asleep. That's why it wakes you up. The conscious system would be everything else that is operating when you are awake. And the difference between these two systems would be that the conscious system allows you to exert control over what you're doing. It allows you to think into the abstract. It allows you to think of complex operations as well. And so I think it's important to make a distinction here. Self-awareness is all of the information via stimuli being interpreted. And consciousness is deciding to say yes or no, or exerting some form of control over all of that processed information. I think that what separates human beings from other animal species is that we evolved specifically to be social, and this has given rise to many benefits. It has given us a greater capacity for morality. It has given us the ability to better understand that certain actions may harm other individuals. It has given us a greater capacity for complex thought. It has given us a greater capacity for culture. With culture, we can set laws that people should not deviate from. We can have a stoplight on the street, and when everyone sees it, they can understand that it means to stop. All of these come together to give us a better extended sense of self-awareness and consciousness that we don't observe in other animal species.
What is the source of all things? Try to imagine yourself in a dream. Imagine yourself in a dream that is very long, very clear, very vibrant, and a dream that you are trapped in and can't get out of. Now, if you are in this dream, you could look around in this dream world and see all kinds of things, you could have all kinds of perceptions, you could sense all kinds of objects. If someone were to ask you in this dream, what is the source of all of this? For you to look around in the dream and point to objects and try to conclude that something out there was your source, and was the source of all of those things, you would be incorrect from the very get-go. But if you could step out of the dream and look at it objectively, as soon as you awake from the dream, you realize that that whole scenario, the whole world, all of the perceptions, all of the objects you were seeing, even though they seemed so real and so physical and so incredibly solid while you were in the dream, when you awaken you realize that all of it was derived from you. All of the people that were with you, around you, helping you, all of the objects you were looking at, all of the perceptions that you were seeing were actually coming out of you the whole time. And from that perspective you can stop and think that, well, if I would have just stopped and noticed that the only thing at that moment that I really knew for sure was that I was there and that I was experiencing it. I think by thinking about these kinds of thought experiments, like what our answer would be if we were trapped in a dream, we get sort of a hint of what the answer really is. Your eye works kind of like a camera, but a camera can't see. Your ears work kind of like a microphone, but a microphone can't listen. The one asking the question and the one trying to give an answer is this mysterious thing called the experiencer. The one that's having these experiences, the one that sees, the one that hears, that thing that is able to have experiences. It's not a camera, it's not a microphone. These things can record information, make pictures, and make sounds, but they can't experience them, they can't view them, they can't hear. And it's funny and kind of an ironic cosmic joke, the one thing that we know to be true is this experiencer. The only thing that I really have a direct knowledge of is me, the experiencer, that thing that is having this moment and being here. That thing is a scientific anomaly. In our current model and scientific understanding of the universe, it can't really even exist. It's an impossibility. But it does. I know this. It's one of the only, it is the only thing that I really know. Even the statement, I know, is referring to that. And whatever that is, that thing which I am, which you are, which all of us are, that is what I believe is the source of all these things.
Whenever we ask about the fundamental essence of something, I think, well, we're talking about the unconditioned, the absolute, right? So the essence of things is not itself a thing. The essence of things is the unthinged. If to be a thing is to be in relation to other things, right? And to be conditioned causally by those other things. To be a thing is to have something outside yourself, right? And when we ask about the essence of all things, the fundamental essence of all things, well, we're talking about that which creates things, that which grounds things, but is not itself grounded by things. There are various names for that. You could call it freedom, God, or the absolute. And I think the second question, what is the source of this essence, is, well, what can you say about that? It is its own source. The absolute is its own source. On the other hand, the absolute must contain within itself its own ground, its own possibility of creation, so that, my answer to the first question, what is the fundamental essence, to say that that is God is not to fully determine the nature of God. God must not only be essence but existence, not only
possible but actual. And in fact, you know, traditionally, for traditional theology, God is pure act, complete act, and nothing remains in reserve, you know. God is the totality, the totally present being, whose existence is entire. So God is God's own source, and yet, in order to exist, God must be other than itself. God must be self-othering, in other words. So I have a minute left to answer the final question, which is, who is aware of all this? And I would say that the awareness is what takes place between the possibility, or the essence of God, and the actuality, or the existence of God. Who is aware of all this? Namely, you and I, we here, present now, are aware of all of this. But we here, present now, as finite, incarnated beings within the causal nexus of space and time, are also, are both the essence and the existence of God at once. We are the fallen creator. That's really what the human being is, where we exist in this paradox of being present simultaneously in both infinite and finite realms or domains of reality. The infinite isn't really a domain, right? The infinite is the context within which any finite domain might take place. So that's who's aware of all this. So I've tried to unpack a Trinitarian response to a Trinitarian question. I don't know if it made any sense, but I'm not asking you to pay me anything for it, so thanks for listening.
Although this is going to use some scientific terms, this is not a scientific theory of any type. It is my personal views based on my internal knowledge, and don't take it as any sort of authority. It is a belief and not a fact, or even a hypothesis, to be honest with you. With our knowledge of science in the world, including quantum mechanics and relativity and everything, we found that the world is a lot stranger than we think. Particles pop into existence and vanish. At times, a particle and an antiparticle are formed, and one whizzes off into the distance and annihilates another particle, while the original continues on in another direction. And so it makes you wonder what the fuck is going on. And in order to reduce it to something that's probably easy to understand, imagine you have two balloons. One is a standard round balloon, and the other one is the big long balloon that you would use to make balloon animals. They hold the same volume of air, but inside those balloons, because the shape of the balloon is different, the air currents that inflate the balloons behave in different ways. And so those air currents have different dynamics. In this analogy, the rubber skin of the balloon would be the shape of the universe. And the air currents inside would be how the energy interacts with both the balloon itself, or the universe, and how it interacts with itself. And those air currents would give rise to things like stars and us and all the matter and other aspects of the universe that we can detect outside of the shape of it. So to me, that's what the universe looks like, at least conceptually. It's a balloon being inflated by a current of energy. Now, that's kind of the easy part of this. The tougher part is explaining why things look the way they do to us. In quantum mechanics, things are crazy. It doesn't make sense to the average person. I mean, you sit down, you look at it, and you say things can't just pop into existence and vanish. And we look at the world around us, and that doesn't happen. I'm here, I'm not here and there and somewhere else, I'm one person. And I think that's a problem of observation. The only true problem in quantum mechanics has always been the problem of measurement. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, in part, talks about this, how you can't ever know for certain the velocity and the momentum of a particle, because through measuring it, you alter one or the other in order to get the former's result. And I think the reason why that is because, as we know, we are all energy. And so our universe can be seen as a simple wave function. Now, the way I look at this, the way a wave function is described is that this is the sum total of potentials. Let's make it a single wave, just peak, valley. Yeah, we're good. This is our universe, but what we see is maybe that part of it. And the reason why I say this is because of choice, the illusion of free will, and quantum mechanics, the way we see things on the subatomic scale pop into existence and vanish from existence. When we're looking at the wave function of a particle, we see the whole wave. So in a way, we're almost peering beyond the boundaries of our universe, if only for a moment. And at that time, we can't determine anything. We don't know. There's no way for us to determine the momentum or the velocity of a particle. And that would all be based on initial conditions of when this happened. Now, how this translates up to the larger reference frames, like us. When we look at the world, we don't see this. We see the particle. We see the point. We see that this wall is a wall and it exists. It's not popping into and out of existence. When I look away from the wall, I know the wall is still there. This is the problem of observation. And the problem of observation is that observation must be defined. You must have parameters, otherwise there is no observation. You can't look at something that doesn't exist and observe it. But there are things that we know exist, but physics say that we can't know they exist. So some people have come up with these thought processes that the universe and us, we're all like some sort of a hologram. I don't buy into that. I don't agree. It doesn't make sense. To me, I think the most reasonable aspect of this would be what some call the many worlds hypothesis. So let's say I'm confronted with, and we're limiting the scope to me, let's say I'm confronted with a choice. I can drink my coffee or not drink my coffee, which I'm going to do. Now, let's limit our frame of reference to that choice. I can not do it, and I can do it. So here I've drank my coffee, here I haven't. Now we live in a reality where I have. The reality where I haven't still exists. They both happen. So although you're watching a video from me in the reality in which I did, some other version of you was watching in a reality where I didn't. And both of these things happen. Now a lot of people say, how can both of these things happen, but we don't see them both? And the reasoning for that, or at least my explanation for that, is that when I make that decision, I am in a superposition of where I have both done it and not done it. And once I make that decision, I decohere. The wave doesn't break down, but my referential frame changes. I'm no longer posed at that superposition where I can do either one. And my reality continues on as though I've done it, while someone else's reality will continue on as though I haven't. And these two realities both exist. Now, one of the other things that's of interest is some people say, well, that's crazy. That means you could have a universe in which anything happens. And I don't think you can, actually. A lot of people know the very famous double slit experiment where there's a machine down here, fires off a single photon, and it can go through this slit or that slit, or it can bounce off one of the walls and go nowhere. And what we found with quantum mechanics is that not only does it go through both slits, but it also appears to have gone through the wall in some cases, and in other cases it's bounced off the wall and gone through the wall. So we're looking at a wave function. And the result you get on, let's say, a medium up here that does nothing but detect photons is you get this interference pattern where the intensity gets higher and higher as you get to spots where you would classically expect the photon to show up, and it gets a little bit weaker. And then there are a couple of spots in the middle here where you see nothing. And the reasoning for why you see nothing in here is because it doesn't travel as a particle through these slits. It travels as a wave function. So every photon that's emitted is a wave function, like this. And when the wave hits these things, it comes through as a double wave function, similar to how if you drop a pebble into water and you watch the wave go out with a rock in the middle, you'll watch the wave hit the rock and split. So what you get is a wave function like this and a wave function like this, and as they propagate out, they interfere with each other right here. And when you have two waves, this always gets messy. When you have two waves that are completely opposite, like this, equal but opposite, they end up, when you sum them, you get this. It cancels out. So effectively what this means is that although the potential for the number of universes is infinite, the actual type of universe that you can get from this is limited to the universes that don't interfere with each other. The ones where impossible things could happen don't exist because they cancel each other out. And so what we get is a multitude of disjoined universes like ours, where individual decisions are made. And so this provides both a rational limit to what can be, while allowing for an infinite, coherent universe. And that's the way I see it.
You're living in a matrix. A computational world, a computer simulation, however you like to think about it. Although this is very taboo conclusion, it's abhorrent to you really to think about this, the fact that, you know, it questions free will and the very nature of the reality as you understand it. But I think the point of view is borne out. There are many people making theories that we and proving with very simple assumptions that we are in a computational universe. I think the very fact that we have discovered the discrete nature of matter and energy, with the finding of the fundamental constant, the Planck constant, and the implications for this, meaning that we have Planck time, and Planck time then means that the universe is updated at very discrete, definite time intervals, is a direct analogy of a computer simulation. In fact, this solves the paradox of the constancy of speed of light. If you conceive of different systems within reality, depending on the velocity and proximity to masses, this resolves the idea of time dilation. Like in a computer system, depending on how often a system is updated and processed by its polling interval, polling and pacing interval, then this resolves the constancy of speed of light paradox. And the idea that seems so strange to us, the idea of future time travel through the time Einstein's discovered time dilation effects, traveling at high speed. Mathematics has never really resolved the philosophical problem of the infinite, of infinite series. It's brushed over only definitionally, and for this reason, calculus is not a real answer to the philosophical problem of Zeno's paradoxes, that movement is an illusion. So I don't mean to be a hack here. I think this point of view is well-founded and not really just some silly person unable to determine the difference between science fiction films and reality.
Now, you have told me that you understand that I will have to decompose the questions and in the end answer other questions, different questions. The way they're asked, they make some assumptions that make them unanswerable. You've also challenged me, saying I have no idea what the source and the answer to these kinds of questions, and really that's true. Nobody does. The way they're asked, that nobody could have an idea. That it's like, tell me an idea of the unthinkable. If you come up with one, it was thinkable, right? So the first question is, what's the common foundational substance that all things break down into? Well, there is an answer to, what can you break all things down into? But it's not a substance. It's more foundational. Now, when we're talking about foundation, we're talking about one thing defined in terms of another. The idea of substance is told in terms of something else. So that something else is more foundational. So even substance breaks down into this other thing. And what that thing is phenomena. Phenomena are the sense perceptions that you get, the bundles of sense perceptions. Those are the phenomena. And everything you experience, which is everything for you, everything you could mention as a thing or think of as a thing, experience as a thing, those all break down into phenomena. Now it goes to question 2, which is, what is the source of this foundational substance? Well, it's not a substance, it's phenomena, it's information. Materialism can play a role, but that's not an assertion that there's substance. Materialism is an assertion that there is a material and physical framework that allows the information to be transferred, and the information is material. Doesn't mean it's a substance. Think about it, even water. There's some water, look, a substance, water. I will put my hand in it. Oh, the substance got my hand wet. My hand is now wet. No, your hand is not in the state of wet. Not really. It's not really a substance. It's trillions and trillions of individual water molecules. Statistically, you can ignore the individuality of the reality of it, call it a substance, call it this ancient idea from thousands of years ago. But when you have a theory of what's the source of the phenomena, when you're saying what is this, where's this, the phenomena is the spring, it comes out of the ground, but it comes from somewhere we can't see. Where is that? What's filling the well? We don't know, but we have a word for it. Nomina, or noumena. And we used to think that those were things. The noumena were things, and somehow it broke up into phenomena, and then we recollected it. And of course, when we collected it into the thing in our head, that must relate exactly to what is in reality. No. In our head, we have substance and ideas and properties, ideals. Out there, it's just noumena. It's more like phenomena than things. It's more like broken up, millions of broken up energy transactions going on. It's an action. It's inaction. You say, what exactly is aware of all of this? Well, what exactly? Let's just put it this way. The universe, some part of the universe is aware. We know that because we're part of the universe. This follows by definition. By definition of the phenomena. The universe is a phenomena to us. We are aware of that phenomena, and we are that phenomena. The universe is aware of this, whatever it is we're talking about that we're aware of. Now to go up into higher levels of materialism. What does it look like? You know, when materialism is a theory of where phenomena are coming from, right? It's the material world, the world from which material phenomena are evident. They correspond. They have multiple, they correlate in a lot of different ways. Material facts are highly correlated with each other. Material facts always fit together. So, in that theory of materialism, it looks like we are energy in fields.
The source of all things is a grand cosmic vagina. Awareness is a cosmic eyelid opening, and the essence of all things, the fundamental essence, is the eye. But actually, I guess I would rather say that the source of all things implies a timeline, and I mean there seems to be a infinite, radiant, multi-dimensional exteriority of each of our beings, and an infinite interiority of each of what we might call our atomic particles that define ourselves. And so I think the fundamental, the source of all things has to do with the lingual acceptance of a paradigm that suggests that everything came from some form of monism, that if we were to compare that to just our most ecstatic alert state, and to say the exteriority of our alert state as it radiates through inner, multiple dimensions infinitely outward, defines our relationship to the cosmos as being sourced, abounding from us in all directions, and that it falls internally into the self, and that awareness is a corroboration of intelligence, lingual, inherited, customary patterns of how it is we describe the I, the signifiers that point to and suggest a separation from one person to another, from myself to you, and that kind of a the fundamental essence of all things, I think, is like a scratching away of all delineations of differences. Any conceived notion, it's almost like the erasure of language by the scratching away of delineations of differences yields a complete communion with all things. And it's difficult to say because even all of these words would be erased, but it's a singular sense of self is the essence of all things, but not of self in the ego-based sense, but a sense of one's relationship, even saying one, the ecstatic breaking of all walls, all conceptual and lingual walls.
What is the foundational substance? Consciousness, but that's not substance. Energy, but that's not substance, except when it is, of course. Whether you define it as the wave or the particle, the energy or the substance. And does anything break down into something else? Can we reduce everything to a common element, if you will? I mean, I thought of so many things came to mind as I was pondering this morning and as I pondered it before. Love is the essence of all things. And what is the source? The source is consciousness. Love comes from consciousness. And what is awareness? Awareness is being conscious of the consciousness. It's being aware that everything is interconnected. It's being aware of oneness and unity. There are so many people in the world who are still trying to prove separation and arguing in favor of limitations, arguing in favor of judgment, arguing in favor of their religious training, which is a mistraining completely. Ah, the paradox. I was trained to think that God is the essence of all things, the source of all things. By him all things are made and consist. The creator and the creation being one. No separation. And yet all in my earthly experience cries out for separation. Where is this creator? In the Wingmakers, there's a line that has always struck me powerfully. As the creator is speaking, my vastness makes me invisible and unavoidable. Who is aware? The mystics touch the awareness. But if I am a mystic, I must admit that I don't always feel that awareness. I'm not always aware of that awareness. All of my life, love has been the key and central theme. And yet I recognize that there are times in my life that I have not behaved lovingly to those around me. I have fallen short of my expectation of myself. I have not met my ideal. And I don't mean that in the sense of meeting my spiritual other half or my spiritual partner. I mean the ideal of me, about me. Who am I? Ah, the big question of life that many people in this generation are now pondering, and pondering very deeply as we are confronted with our world collapsing. For we have identified ourselves, most of us, perhaps all of us, to some degree or another, with how it seems in this world that the Eastern religions refer to as an illusion. And I think that's as much of a cop-out as the Western world thinking everything is separate and sinful. Things are never what they appear to be in this world, which is why I guess it's referred to as an illusion. There's always something deeper, something more to be experienced, and for those in the left brain, to be explained. But source and essence, while we grope for words to explain, it goes beyond explanation. Whatever explanation we come up with, there's more than that. There has to be more than that. I think. I feel. And sometimes I think and feel I know. And there's no doubt. But other times, that's just not the way it is. But if there's anything I want to convey to you that are watching and listening, is I'm admitting what I've always admitted from the beginning with all of these videos, is that I'm the paradox man. Sometimes I'm up and sometimes I'm down. Sometimes I'm feeling so connected and sometimes I'm feeling absolutely scattered and not connected at all. And this is part of the human journey. I've accepted it. I've embraced it as such. I very rarely get into the position where I'm arguing with myself. I don't want this. I don't want this. Now, there are things that I don't want. But I've come more and more to accept that what is always has a gift in it. And I train myself to look for that gift. And I suggest that you might want to try that same thing. Don't think that you know it all. Because I know when I ponder questions like this, I realize I don't know it all. I don't have all the answers. And yet a part of me does. I'm also aware of that. But connecting the part that knows with the part that doesn't know, the Gnostic with the agnostic, both me, connecting those, having that marriage of the spiritual with the physical, the higher self with the ego. Yeah, I do believe that the ego has value. I do believe that this illusory experience called human life has meaning. I'm convinced it's true. Many don't think so. That's why they can propose a leap into another world that has no connection to this, leaving the illusion behind, because it's not real, because it is meaningless instead of meaningful.
The thing about these questions is that no matter what answer you come up with, it's not going to change the way that you move through the world. What is the foundational substance of all things, or that all things break down into? I think Tony Parsons, he said, it's marmalade. You know, like, what am I going to do? Give you a letter? It's this. Whatever this is what everything breaks down into. And breaks out of, and grows from. This is the source, and this is the thing, and this is the nothing, and this is the... And keep on going. Just throw letters at it. There's libraries full of answers to these questions. East, west, It's both and, it's either or. For thousands of years, these questions have been bantered back and forth. They feel, because they, in some ways, they feel like the most important questions. What is the fundamental essence? What is awareness? It's still like trying to look for God, you know? God? Excuse me? I know you're busy, but I was just curious. What's the fundamental source of everything? You must be on Facebook. When you, I can't say when you, but what I found is that these are poetic. They're poetic possibilities. Whatever I could say is a poetic possibility. And if I hit into the total honesty of the experience, I can only say I don't know. What is the fundamental source, substance that everything breaks down into? I don't know. And I don't know who doesn't know. You want to scare yourself? Look for it. Where's the center of you? And then you might know that, oh, there's no center. Okay, cool. Does that help you at all? Does that stop you from having to wipe your ass? Wipe the dishes? Does it stop you from doing anything? Does it help you do anything? You know, what is it that you're actually wanting to know in even investigating these questions? It's entertainment. I mean, I get that it's entertaining. Philosophy is very fun. But it doesn't really change anything to find out the answer. Color. Look around. All you see is color. Color in different shapes and shades and hues. You know, what if what you were looking for was color? Forget the spiritual search. What if you just went looking for color? How far would you have to go? Oh, it's right here. It's amazing. So I don't know the answer to these questions. And if you're sincerely looking, then I wish you luck.
So I've been asked to address these questions. And let me say straight away that I can't. This is not just because I don't think the questions actually make any sense. There are actually more significant reasons than that. Our minds evolved in what Dawkins has described as Middle Earth. And thus we have a reasonable understanding and intuition of the average, the moderate, and the mundane. But that understanding and intuition breaks down when we move from our comfort zone in Middle Earth and seek to comprehend extremes, the very fast, the very large, the very small, or the very cold. As with our minds, so too our vocabulary evolved in Middle Earth. And as with our intuition and understanding, so too does our language fail at these extremes. When we first learn of the atom, we are likely to be taught about the Bohr model. We picture solid objects orbiting around a collection of solid spheres. Perhaps we imagine planets orbiting a star, as with our solar system. Or billiard balls. Okay, forget the billiard balls. Later we are taught that these things are not solid objects moving in a Newtonian world, but they have properties of waves. Then, if we persevere, we may learn of the double slit experiment, and these things, such as electrons, are neither particles nor waves. They may display properties of both, but they are neither. Our intuition fails at this point, as does our language. The best we can do, so far as language is concerned, is to fall back upon the familiar wave-particle duality, collapse of the wave function. But this language does little to help our understanding, and it gets more complicated still when we discover that protons and neutrons at the centre of an atom are made up of quarks, and a variety of quarks to boot. But we can't stop at quarks. It's far more abstruse than that. What you are seeing here is a computer simulation of, well, I'll let Lawrence Krauss explain.
This is the space inside of a proton, the empty space inside of a proton. Not where the quarks are, but the empty space between the quarks.
And these propagations, or fields, are not insignificant.
Most of the mass of the proton comes not from the quarks within a proton, but from the empty space between the quarks. These fields, popping in and out of existence, produce about 90% of the mass of a proton. And since protons and neutrons are the dominant stuff in your body, the empty space is responsible for 90% of your mass.
Is this substance? Is this foundational? My point is, at this scale, at this dimension, words are almost meaningless. Consider black holes. What are they made of?
So are black holes made of anything?
Black hole. We don't really have any idea what's going on, so.
There is one language that comes closer than any other to describing these things, the universal language of mathematics. Although, whilst it is universal, it is not universally understood.
1 + 1 = 5.
But even mathematics has its limitations.
Einstein's equations of general relativity simply say the following. The Ricci curvature tensor minus 1/2 the metric tensor times the contracted curvature tensor is proportional to the stress energy tensor. All this says that if I start with a star, a black hole, or even a universe, that determines the curvature that surrounds that concentration of matter and energy. But inside these equations, there's a monster.
In the extreme gravity at the core of a black hole, Einstein's equations spiral wildly out of control.
After a very long, tedious calculation, I mostly get zeros, but the non-zero term is given as follows. M is the mass of the black hole. R describes the distance from the black hole. Here is the problem. Right there, when R is equal to 0, the point at which physics itself breaks down. So 1/r equals 1/0 equals infinity. To a mathematician, infinity is simply a number without limit. To a physicist, it's a monstrosity. It means that, first of all, gravity is infinite at the center of a black hole, that time stops, and what does that mean? Space makes no sense. It means the collapse of everything we know about the physical universe. In the real world, there's no such thing as infinity. Therefore, there is a fundamental flaw in the formulation of Einstein's theory.
And that is just one example of the limitation of our understanding. Let me throw in another. Current ideas suggest that dark energy and dark matter make up 95% of the universe, and no one has the faintest idea what it is. 95% of the universe is unknown to us, and even the 5% that we are aware of, we do not fully understand. There remains an unfathomable wealth of knowledge and understanding to come. I won't be here to see it, and even if I were, I'm sure I wouldn't understand it. There are limitations to my understanding, and that frustrates me. What I would give to spend one day in the mind of Einstein, Turing, or Feynman. But I do have sufficient intelligence to appreciate that I'm thick as a brick. So going back to the questions, I cannot possibly answer them, save perhaps for the third. I am fairly confident that no one knows. That's why I consider it funny when I hear scientists being described as arrogant, and that science claims to know everything. This is such a misrepresentation of the position that it would be funny if it were not so offensively inaccurate. Science knows it doesn't know everything. Science is excited by unknowns. Scientists are tickled by the rub of discovery. Curiosity is its driving force. And if, on occasion, science does claim to have knowledge, such claims are based on solid foundations, foundations of evidence, provable evidence. Let's have a look at a few more of those so-called arrogant scientists, before moving on to what I consider to be true arrogance.
Oh, okay. Already you've asked me a question that I can't answer.
One thing is I can live with doubt and uncertainty and not knowing. I think it's much more interesting to live not knowing than to have answers which might be wrong. I have approximate answers and possible beliefs and different degrees of certainty about different things, but I'm not absolutely sure of anything. And then many things I don't know anything about, such as whether it means anything to ask, why we're here, and what the question might mean. I might think about it a little bit. If I can't figure it out, then I go to something else.
I don't understand black holes. I love black holes. I love black holes because I don't understand them.
A singularity is when our understanding of nature breaks down. That's what a singularity is.
Compare that humility and the acceptance of ignorance with the outrageous arrogance of some of the religious, those that will tell you with certainty how and why everything is as it is. And where do they get this insight from? Oh, come on. Do you really need a clue? Okay.
So the Bible says, now in Romans chapter number 1, Romans 6:23 is in 2 Thessalonians 2:11, beginning with Isaiah 43, Numbers chapter number 21, Romans 6:23, Isaiah 53:6. In Matthew 13 and Romans 3 says, John chapter 3. Jesus said in John 5:24, John 14:6, John 5:46, Romans 5:8. Ephesians 2:8 and 9 says, Genesis 1:26, and John 5:4, Numbers chapter number 2. You know what I hope you know what I'm trying to say.
These are the people that will tell you all of this was created so that man could scrape out an existence on part of the crust of an average planet orbiting an average star in an average galaxy. These are the people who will tell you that they know the mind of God. They know who their God wants you to share a bed with, what you can eat, what you can wear, and most outrageously of all, what will happen to you after you die. Of course, they have absolutely no evidence to support any of this, other than their own subjective interpretation of an old book and the inconsequential accounts of personal experience. And how tragic and how chronically banal are their explanations when they do venture into the realms of science.
Why does the outside of a galaxy spin 10 times too fast? Faster than its inside? When gravity and physics tells us this cannot be? Because it's the hand of God that operates it.
How shallow, how desperate, how pathetic. Their certainty is nothing to be admired. It's to be pitied. But it should also be seen for what it is. Utter, pig-headed arrogance.
dprjones recently responded to 3 philosophical questions put to him by SageBodisattva. Whilst I agree with much that DPR says in his methodologically naturalistic response, in this video I make a more ontologically naturalistic response to those questions. Being an ontological substance entails being basic. Thus, it is redundant to talk of foundational substance, as a substance is nominally foundational. Similarly, an ontological substance is, by definition, durable and independent of other things. Thus, talk of all other things breaking down into a substance is also redundant. Stripped of this redundancy, the ontological question, as put to naturalists such as DPR and I, is what, according to naturalism, is substance? I would answer that a substance is that thing which necessarily features in our best empirical theories as the most basic, durable and independent thing. Thus, the space in a neutron, as referenced by the most predictively accurate and explanatorily superior theory of physics, is indeed a substance. Substance, in this sense, is that which is more basic and durable than, and independent of, those secondary things which happen to be mere arrangements of it. Of course, some things being a substance has metaphysical implications, including implications about its reality and its causal rank. To talk of the origin of what naturalists regard as substance is to imply that this substance has a cause. However, one implication of being a substance is that it is only ever a cause and never an effect. Otherwise, it would be neither durable nor independent, and thus not a substance. Of course, a naturalist will admit that her idea of substance may be wrong. The history of science is, after all, a history of continual and ongoing ontological revision. But to suggest such a revision, for example in favour of a deity, without the support of an improved theory that yields predictions of greater accuracy and more rational, efficient and optimally flexible explanations of tested results, is to engage in the kind of groundless speculation avoided by the wise. Philosophical naturalists prefer to stop telling causal tales at the point where they have no good reason to elaborate further. DPR is right to point out that this humility sets naturalists apart from some of the more ambitious, religiously motivated metaphysicians. To the ontological naturalist, whose ordering of being is shaped by natural science, awareness is not usually taken to be a deeply essential property, which is to say that psychological beings of the sort to whom awareness is typically attributed are, on the naturalist's account, mere arrangements of non-psychological substance. A substance to which awareness is not, at least after rational investigation, typically attributed. Thus, to the naturalist, an overseeing mind is not a deep metaphysical necessity. As to a completely comprehensive awareness, well, the ontological naturalist would as readily admit to the incompleteness of her account as would the methodological naturalist. This is a virtue. Indeed, I would suggest that those who lust after a complete and irrefutable understanding of all and everything are better disposed to the extreme and dogmatic wings of theology and ideology than to either science or philosophy. I hope this video has, despite the density of some of the ideas introduced, been a useful ontological addendum to DPR's methodological reply to SageBodisattva's questioning of naturalism. Thank you for listening.
One of the difficulties when trying to consider the essence of all things, of awareness, we can tend to look at it from our very human, very limited perspective. You know, we consider ourselves to be the most intelligent creatures on the planet, and therefore what we have is ultimate truth, and yet we view through a very tiny lens most of the time. Imagine looking at life from the perspective of a tree, for example, a several hundred-year-old tree, and what it might have seen move around it, the changes, the creation and destruction that it might see, and waves move before it. Or imagine that you're looking at it from the perspective of a rock that's been extruded from out of the earth and brought out into the light, and then over millennia sees all these comings and goings and shiftings and changings. Think of all time, all that's been, all that is to come, and all that ties it together. Imagine all of space. And imagine watching, or just imagine watching this planet through all the time that it's experienced. And you would see this kind of moving sea of life. You know, the individual lives might not look like very much in themselves, because you would, you know, they would come and they would go in an absolute flash, and they would then become something else. The atoms that made them up, whatever they were composed of, would move into something else. This constantly moving sea. When we consider only from our own little perspective, we miss an awful lot. We miss the fact that in beyond this little time that we look from, all that it lies between any of us is connective tissue, organic, changing, ever-changing. So what happens outside us, what we are engaged in, is also part of us in a sense. The essence behind that constant motion is the source of all things, a constant of which we are a part. Nothing is truly separate from us. We might have the conceit of imagining that it is, and that we are totally separate entities moving about of our own volition, or even not of our own volition. But that isn't actually the case, not viewed from a broader perspective. In reality, the dividing lines between us are quite ephemeral and a lot less solid than we imagine.
What do I consider to be the source of all things? I'm going to have to go with current research and study, M-theory, string theory, which also has the added bonus of feeling right in my gut that the source of everything is absolutely nothing. We understand, for the most part, that vacuum is unstable. Absolute nothingness is inherently unstable. So when you have infinite nothingness, you are infinitely unstable, and the possibility of something coming into being or just sparking because of infinite potential is 100%. So I believe that the source of everything is the instability of the universe as we understand it. To read more into it than that is beyond me. And to move into the question of awareness and where does awareness spring from, I kind of put that under the same subcategory as free will, a kind of illusion, where free will I don't believe exists at all. It is your subconscious processes, doing all the configurations, coming to a conclusion logically based on what other things have happened in your life and what information you've been presented with, and you become aware of what your desire is. I don't believe you have any control over that. You can perhaps plan ahead, do some personal exploration, personal training, but even that comes from processes in the background that you have no awareness of, but you become aware as the processes are finished. Awareness, to me, is just the understanding of what your brain, what your body, what your physicality has come to the conclusion of. That sounds a little cryptic, but awareness in general, I believe, is a type of an illusion, and you can't really nail down an illusion. And the question of fundamental essence. This is where I have to punt. I actually have tried for quite some time to dwell on what the fundamental essence is, or what even a fundamental essence could be. And I am either deficient in my knowledge or understanding, maybe I am slightly autistic, or maybe a little too literal. I don't even understand what a fundamental essence is. There may be somebody out there, a philosopher that's more trained in thought, more ingenious, and has ways around thinking about hard topics. I'm going to have to shrug my shoulders. I don't even know what a fundamental essence is, except maybe the culmination of all the processes, physical, mental, chemical, put together, and the outcome. is the fundamental essence of all those processes. Other than that, I would just be making stuff up. And knowing how things came into being, how reality was created, and having an awareness of those processes is incredibly advantageous for humanity. Being a self-aware, somewhat creature, we can then use that to further our understanding in general and increase our quality of life and extend our ability to shape our world into something that we desire. And as we figure out what we desire, then that will change exponentially as well. Peace.
What is the fundamental essence of reality? What is the source of this essence? And how does this relate to consciousness? Now, these are pretty big questions, and really they form the subject matter of philosophy, at least as it was practiced from around 2,600 years ago up until about 100 years ago, when things started to get a lot more weird. Now, the first thing to say, I think, about this is that the idea of an essence or substance goes all the way back to Aristotle, who, along with Plato, was the founder of one of the two main threads in Western philosophy. Aristotle thought that facts were the ultimate reality, while Plato thought that it consisted of ideas. And this is a dichotomy that really persists right up until the present day, with the basic question being, does thought and consciousness create the universe, or is it the other way around? And the idea of substance remained central to the argument up to about the time of Hume and Berkeley, when it really started to crumble. And nowadays, essentially nobody believes in it anymore, with the final nail having been hammered into the coffin by the discoveries of modern physics. Up until around the turn of the 20th century, we would have been able to say that substance is composed of atoms, the basic building blocks of the universe. But the discovery of subatomic particles began to undermine the very concept of a thing or an object, since they behave more like potentialities and can be thought really as more like a series of events rather than as objects in the everyday sense of the word. But of course, not everybody is impressed by this. The phenomenologists believe that science itself is hidebound and that the truth can only be understood by breaking down experience to its fundamental building blocks, and this ultimately leads on to existentialism. But this in its own turn is undermined by the idea that language is the source of self-consciousness and therefore the ultimate source of all of the problems that philosophy seeks to explain, including the idea of a soul or a self. And these are ideas that come from Wittgenstein, whose fundamental message is that our ways of thinking are determined by language, and that language is a tool to negotiate the Lebenswelt, the life world, which is the everyday world that we experience on the surface of things. So what this means is that we can't use our minds to probe into the ultimate nature of reality, because that isn't what they're for. So, as the saying goes, the universe is not only stranger than we imagine, it's stranger than we can imagine. So I think in answer to the question, what is the fundamental essence of reality, I think it always in the end comes back to Wittgenstein and his famous sign-off on the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, whereof we cannot speak, thereof we must remain silent.
These are fantastic questions. They're questions because I think you often find out about the way that thought works and understanding works, and gain a better understanding, I think, by not by necessarily looking for answers, but looking at the shape of questions. What kinds of questions do we ask? And from those questions, I think we can find out a lot about ourselves and our relationship to what might be thought of as answers. And what you're talking about here, which is really interesting, is what you call the common foundational substance that all things break down into. foundational substance. These are really key terms, I think, here. You know, because the idea of substance is, let me start with the idea of substance. Substance is fantastic. I think in Aristotle, because Aristotle was one of the first philosophers to think in terms of categories and to recognise that we experience the world in terms of categories and thought and conceptualisation is categorical. If we didn't have categories, we wouldn't be able to think and do all those kind of things. And in Aristotle, substance is the primary category. I think I'm right in saying that. And then other kind of subcategories break down from that. But substance is I'm not sure you'd say foundational, but it's the primary category in Aristotle, and I think that's the case as well. Just in routine thought, you know, the way that we think about the world, we think about it in terms of substances, stuff. That's the way that our experience forms the world, isn't it? You know, it's one of the primary metaphors. I mean, a lot of my understanding of this comes out of embodied cognition and conceptual metaphor theory and cognitive linguistics. That's kind of my area of research. But certainly within all that, you know, substance is, you know, absolutely foundational, not necessarily to the world, but the idea of substance is foundational to our capacity to think, and it's one of the most prolific metaphors that we understand things by. So, for example, when we're talking about knowledge, and I think this kind of relates to where you're coming from here, actually, Sage. When we're talking about something like knowledge, for example, we talk about it as if it was a substance. You know, we talk about hard knowledge, don't we? And that's, yeah, you might say, well, that's just a metaphor, but it's one of those metaphors which there isn't an alternative to. When you're talking about something like knowledge, it's inherently abstract. You have to use a metaphor in order to be able to think and talk about it at all, and the metaphor we use is substance metaphors. So we talk about hard knowledge, as I say, and then when we want to move into different kinds of understandings of knowledge, we might for a while talk about softer knowledge, and some of the sciences are called the soft sciences because they represent knowledge in ways which aren't quite so firmly bounded and aren't so rigid, aren't so hard. Again, you can probably feel the substance metaphors being deployed here. But once you get out of the sciences and into other kinds of ways of thinking, and I know some of the ways of thinking that you're interested in, what you might call spiritual or transcendent or metaphysical ways of thinking, still substance metaphors dominate, but we start to think of the knowledge that operates in those domains as being, pardon me, we start to think of that kind of knowledge as kind of vaporous or gaseous, very, very soft indeed, volatile, almost, you might say, like a spirit. And I don't think it's an accident that the word spirit both applies to a certain kind of experience or way of knowing, but also applies to volatile liquids that evaporate in the air quite easily, you know, and rise and are kind of evanescent and hard to handle, and you know, all those kind of properties that we give to volatile substances are also commonly attributed to spirituality itself. So again, we're deploying substance metaphors to understand all kinds of knowledge. So the foundational substance, I'll come back to the word foundational, but substance as you're using it there, I think, the fact that you're choosing to use that as part of your question points to a way that we understand the world. We understand the world in terms of substances. It doesn't necessarily say anything about the world, but it definitely does say something about our capacity to engage with it and the relationships that are being set up constantly between ourselves and the world via our bodies and minds. And just on that, by the way, I don't think it's any accident that the word substance, is very closely allied to the word understand. You know, sub means under, stance, understand. There's a very close relationship between substance and understanding. Conceptually, in the dream that is our non-cognitive processes, where we're constantly doing that kind of thing, I think. And I'm not sure if that makes any sense. I feel like I'm rambling. Anyway, never mind. Anyway, the fact that it's foundational, I think, is great too. Foundational. Again, this comes down to Actually, before I go on to that, this the substance, I made a video a while back, and I meant to remake it actually, I never got around to it. This idea of ephemeral, ethereal, volatile, translucent substances, you know, the stuff of methylated spirits, the stuff of vodka, the stuff of these substances which kind of evaporate and just disappear and rise. I think you find that playing out really well in an old song by Norman Greenbaum called Spirit in the Sky. I don't know if you know this song. When I lay me down to die, going up to the spirit in the sky. This whole idea that we have, that our understanding at that point, the hard parts of our understanding, just like the hard parts of our body, the hard and heavy and gravitationally attracted parts of our body will go down, but our spirit, the less hard, the less fixed, the more volatile substances will kind of rise, almost like ectoplasm from the body, and disappear to the spirit in the sky, you know, where all the volatile liquids eventually end up. Anyway, yes, foundational substance. Again, when we talk about foundations, we're using a building metaphor. It's ultimately based in substance. It's ultimately based on what goes underneath, the substance, the understanding, the thing that props us up and allows us to be slightly elevated. All those kind of vertical metaphors, metaphors of verticality and of raising and of structure, starting from the bottom. Foundational substance is a really great word, because the whole idea of a foundation is deeply built into our bodies. You know, the fact that we are, you know, mammals walking around on a small planet in a class 3, orbiting a class 3 star or whatever it is. We're prey to gravity, but we also use gravity all the time. Our buildings are propped up by gravity, and with part of that is the idea of foundation. So the idea of the foundation as being the most important, the bit that you can't do without. You know, you can't build a house without something at the bottom, you know, because gravity prevents you doing that. So that whole idea comes out of, again, our embodiment as certain kinds of animals on a certain kind of planet, with the brains appropriate to that and the minds appropriate to that, and minds that are both constructed and constrained by the circumstances of our being, to the point where we can't think outside the box of those constraints much. So that foundational thing, again, is part of our understanding. It's part of our it's part of the substance of our thought. So again, I think we're learning a lot. At least I'm finding a lot to learn from the kinds of questions that you're choosing to ask, and the fact that these questions do come up in all kinds of traditions. Constantly questions about substance, which are also questions about understanding, and questions about foundation, which is the bottom level of understanding. What's the most substantive? What's the most foundational? What's the deepest form of understanding? These are all the metaphors of how our thinking works. So I'm just going to try and get to the bottom of this one. What is the source? I could talk about source as well. You say, what is the source of this foundational substance? Again, source is again one of those, and it crops up in a lot of kind of religious and spiritual writings, doesn't it? I like the writings of Douglas Harding, for example, who uses the term source quite a bit, but it's also in people like Plotinus, isn't it? But again, source, like foundation, is a particular metaphor that's coming out of our embodiment in the world, isn't it? So the source of a river, or the source of a particular kind of phenomena in the world is the thing that we want to try to trace back to. It's almost geographical metaphor being deployed, but deeply intertwined with foundational and substance metaphors, building and substance metaphors. And who exactly is aware of all this? Yeah, I don't really get the third question in its relationship to the first two, if I'm honest there, Sage. The who. Well, I don't think this is what you mean, but I would turn that around and saying, you know, the awareness of all this, that thing, that strange machinery, this kind of dreaming machine that is producing these ideas of substances and understandings and foundations, and is doing all this fantastic narrative building work with the experiences of our senses. The construction of all that is the who that you would refer to, I suppose. I don't think I'm guessing that you're speculating about a different kind of spiritual who, but I don't have any investment in that. So I'm saying the whole idea of a who, and the whole idea of an is, and the whole idea of an aware is part of that fabric of largely metaphorical narrative game playing, a beautiful gameplay that our minds are doing at all times, ultimately resolving down to things like substances, to things like ideas of foundations, to ideas of things like sources. Yeah, that's about all I can do on that anyway. Thanks very much for inviting me.
Okay, so I don't know how to respond to this question about the nature of all that is, or the source of awareness, or the fundamental essence of all things. I think at the very least I would want to say that there does seem to be a tripart relationship between and among energy, matter, and information. And in the same way that energy is a capacity to do work, and its possibilities for certain forms of matter, whether those be solid, liquid, gas, and I guess from there, assuming certain kinds of structure in matter, there does seem to be emergent forms of information. And so complexity and orders of complexity are, I think, a large part of this. It has to do with the way energy organized into matter, matter organizes into information, information then goes from indexical information, which is basically contiguity of things being connected in various ways in space and time. The iconicity would be the second layer emerging out of that, where things have a tendency to mean or represent other things by way of a structural similarity or a likeness. And then by the time you get to symbols, symbols are a kind of information that include energy, matter, information, and the two, indexicality and iconicity. But by the time you get to the symbol, you have highly abstract terms, words that have no direct connection through either space or time, or through likeness and similarity, but they're learned by convention. And I think without symbols being a kind of form of energy matter, we wouldn't have imagination and wonder and questioning. And it seems like, the capacity to raise a question which pulls something into a completely different context. This is so much of what we mean by awareness. Awareness seems to be some property by which matter and energy is reflecting back upon itself through disguised forms of distance and self-relation. So, okay, thanks.
What are my thoughts on the fundamental essence of existence? Now, there's a big idea for 3 minutes, and my ideas on it are always emerging. But today, I think that because what we experience is passed to us through 5 physical senses, taste, touch, etc., and the one internal sensory portal, mind or brain, what is out there is fundamentally unknowable in itself. We infer it unconsciously through the filter of these senses, interpreted by conscious and subconscious mind. Mind molds the chaos into meaning as our psyche structures the raw data to give it meaning for us. Jung explained it in his theory of archetypes. So, the meaningful universe we experience can truly be said to be structured by or arise in our minds. We are hardwired to project meaning onto it. That's the essence of the biblical Genesis story. Complete truth, scientific or religious, is an unachievable goal. Approximations to it come from mind's meaning attribution process. What we can't fit into our web of meaning is literally meaningless. So, I believe there can be no full or definitive interpretation. No true reality, as each person is, at least in some part, their own unique creation. So what can we know of truth? Behind our mind's interpreted, over-narrated construction is a lived experience, unmediated, direct. The Buddhist Zen project, for instance, is to intercept this flow of sensory data from the world and mind before the left brain's commentary and interpretation. Dedicated practitioners who work to purify their perceptions do approach the clarity of lived experience, not drowned out by the din of mind chatter. So what can we learn of a fundamental essence? Hesiod wrote that the Greeks, in a touch of genius, recognized the primal affinity force that arose at the origin, eros. It pulled order out of chaos. Later thinkers have intuited something similar, but with different names or metaphors. I recognize it in the first century writer's equation of God with love, and I think the Dalai Lama recognizes its impact in human life when he states that the highest religion is kindness. Some recent thinkers on evolution indicate this quintessence of the evolving world as altruism. Others have developed philosophies of biology suggesting that a fundamental property of all matter is its affinity, its tendency towards complexity, by which higher order entities of organization emerge out of lower order components. It works against chaos. Disorder collapses to build the chain from atoms to molecules, to viruses, to single-cell bacteria, to multi-cell organisms, to primates, to humans. From the brain's neural network comes an emergent mind, and onwards to entities only mystics and science fiction writers dream of. Its action is recognized in all human life, though often reduced to less than it really is, where it is called love, that which brings forth life out of inert matter and consciousness out of oblivion. Some even call it God, but that's a term too burdened with dogma for me.
Nothing would delight the mind more than to be able to say what this is, what the fundamental essence of reality is. But this, from which, in which, and as which all life erupts, cannot be known with the mind. The mind has no tools in its toolbox for knowing what this is. You can throw words at it if you want to. Tao, Brahman, awareness, emptiness, no thing. If it can get you to grab onto some story, some conceptual structure as true or real, or me or mine, if it can make a thing out of no thing, the mind feels much more secure because you're speaking its language. But when the truth of your being is awakened to on a very deep level, it's seen that there can be no true concepts, no true thoughts, no true stories, including any story you might tell yourself about what this is. It's all just seen as more eruption, more dancing appearance. It's not grabbed and believed or identified with. So, with regard to what the implications of this might be for our species, well, ask yourself this. What would happen to the Middle East? What would happen to Wall Street? What would happen to the whole world if, all of a sudden, people were no longer capable of believing their mental stories?
We all know that we are aware, so it's self-evident to everyone. And if somebody says they're not aware, who's aware of them saying that? Or who's aware of not being aware? Okay, the fundamental essence. This is good. I like this. The fundamental essence and how these aspects tie everything together and how they may apply to mankind. The fundamental essence. There is but one essence, the formless Christ of all being. And whether you call this spirit or Christ or awareness, or whatever you want to call it. It's the essence of who we are. And everything else is clothing. So some people worship our individuality, our artistic expression of our unique heart space, different from everything else. Still clothing. Still clothing. Still pretense. Still walls. Still protection. Only to be truly naked, open to recognize that which alone exists, where there is no other thing, no two things in existence. Realizing that we are not only surrounded and pervaded by this, but there is just no even speaking of a we and it. It is just all that is. And that is the fundamental essence of all things. So, the experience of that essence is one for a human being of being touched intensely on an emotional level by the experience of love. And all of this intellectualizing is for the purpose of finding where we hide, how we block, where our armor is, why our armor is. All of the places that we choose fear over love, noise over silence, separation over unity. And we can talk about those things. And what remains is nothing, is emptiness, but not nothing or emptiness in the way that the mind conceives of it, but a living intelligence, ancient, beyond time, here now. And we never have to leave the recognition of this.
Namaste. I've been asked to take part in a documentary in which I've been asked 3 questions, and it's a pleasure to be sharing with you. So let's go into the questions. These are 3 questions. The first question is, what is the fundamental essence of things? And the second question, what is the source of this fundamental essence? And the third question is, what is it exactly which is aware of all this? The question of what is the fundamental essence of all this is as old as time immemorial. Even before the sciences and the technologies of the expansion of consciousness were discovered, this question has occupied the mind to such an extent that people started inquiring into, who am I? What is my true nature? Because they saw logically that the world around them exists, existence exists, the creation is there. So hence it's a very logical question, just as a simple side effect. What is the origin of all this? What is the source of all this? Not just what is the source of all this, but what is the source of my very own being? And to ask this question intellectually may be just useful just simply as a seed, just to plant a certain seed in the mind. By itself it can give a certain inspiration, but inspiration by itself is not enough. That's why I always insist that to make this distinction between what is a spiritual seeker and what is a thinker. This is not a question that is to be asked philosophically. What is the origin of existence? What is the fundamental essence of things? Just as a starting point, it's useful, but it cannot end there. So, what is the fundamental essence of things? It's important to understand that it's not just about the question, what's the fundamental essence of things? It's also about how you ask the question. With what, where's the space From which space is this question coming from? Are we asking this question just as a kind of intellectual entertainment? Or does it come from a very deep, burning desire to know, a certain longing for union? And this question initially, whether we're aware of it or unaware of it, always comes from the longing for union. If this longing for union turns into a conscious process, then we say that the person is on the path. He started initiating himself onto the path. If the longing for union remains as an unconscious process, then we'll be doing all kinds of things in the world, seeking for all kinds of things, projecting our desires outwardly into the world in 1,000,001 different ways, and always finding, unfortunately, the same result, or fortunately, the same result, that it's not satisfying. If this question comes from a deep realization of the unsatisfactoriness of things, then it's not just a mechanical question. The question becomes alive. It becomes impregnated with a certain vitality. And that's why I want to make it clear that without this fundamental vitality beneath the question, which comes from a deep burning desire to know, then the question by itself is it's sterile. It has no potential, no true potential, just as an intellectual seed. Of course, that has a potential, but by itself it's not enough. We can start off with the intellect, but the process can't end there. This question, what's the fundamental essence of things? When this was first asked, it's the origin from where we have all of our ideas of God. Naturally, the existence is there. Then, perhaps it has come into being through a supreme being. And naturally, all the different religions have created a supreme being in their own image, depending on our identifications, but depending on our likes and dislikes, relative to the social standards in a particular society. Different traditions and different cultures have projected different images of God, which is just like a mirror reflection of our own ego. In a way, we've created, our limited ego has created a cosmic ego as a reflection of itself. And that's why the idea of God has given us tremendous comfort, tremendous security. You have cosmic protection for your ego. But such ideas of a God, if that's what we mean by God, it's nothing more than a projection of the mind. And this is so essential to understand about the mind, that the mind is capable of almost infinite number of projections, creating everything in its own image. Rather than allowing the real to come to us, rather than seeing things with total clarity of perception, it projects its own programming onto the world, projects its own identifications, projects its own masks onto existence. And as far as the mind is concerned, the mind is only capable of seeing things from almost infinite number of angles and perspectives, none of which are truly capable of grasping the truth. That reminds me of a very well-known story of 3 blind men who came to see a sage, and they asked him, "What's the truth?" So the sage just took them to see to see an elephant. And he asked each of the blind men to touch one part of the elephant. So one blind man touched the belly and he said, "Oh, it's a wall." Another touched the leg and he said, "Oh, that's a pillar." Another touched the tail and he said, "Oh, it feels like a rope." And suddenly the 3 blind men started arguing and quarreling with one another. And this delighted the sage tremendously. He laughed and he said, "Okay, each one of you is right, and yet each one of you is wrong. Each one of you is right in the sense that you've each grasped certain limited aspects of the truth. But each one of you is wrong because you're clinging to your knowledge. That knowledge has become a bondage upon you. So this is something that we have to understand about the mind, that this is not a question in which we're supposed to produce some answer for it. Look at what has happened in the whole history of philosophy. These kinds of questions have always been asked, and has it really provided any true answers for humanity? Just you answer one question, that becomes a seed which expands into 10 questions, that becomes 10 seeds which expands into 1,000,000 questions, and for every answer you never really find a true answer. All that you find is deeper and deeper levels of more and more questions. That's why, to me, this question is not something which has an answer. It's something that can only be realized through direct perception. Not as an idea, not as a belief system, not as a philosophy, but through the direct perception of what is the very source of your being. What is it within a human being which can't be added, which can't be subtracted? What can be added or subtracted from a human being? The body and the mind. But the source from where all this is manufactured, that's not something that can be added or subtracted. So when you come to a direct perception of that dimension, then it's not that you're going to have an answer in your hands. It's not that you're going to have some truth that you can grasp into your fist. You will simply come to know of a certain silence which brings an end to all questions and answers. And in that silence, now this is what is capable of inner transformation. When the mind becomes totally silent, just like a still lake, reflecting the whole existence. Then you start reflecting your true nature. And that's when what is the fundamental essence of things becomes not something that's answered. The answer becomes your very living experience. And you know, modern science is saying that everything in existence is just one essential energy. If everything in existence is one essential energy, then there's nothing in existence which is not divine. Everything in existence is divine. That's why in the East they've always been saying, especially in the Upanishads, they've said, not just Sarvam Brahmasmi, everything is divine, but also Aham Brahmasmi, I am divine. And that's basically the essential insight of all the spiritual sciences, that the core of one's own being and the core of the whole existence are one and the same, inseparable. When this becomes a living reality for you, then you become the living truth. When you become the living truth, and every word, every gesture, every action will be a direct expression of your own Buddha nature. So, what is the fundamental essence of things? If I'm going to answer this question as an intellect, because you know you've asked this question, you're expecting a logical answer. So the only answer I can give you as far as intellect is concerned is, I don't know. I simply don't know. This is not something that we can grasp into our fist. It reminds me of one incident of a disciple which went to see a Zen master. And he asked him, what is the way? What's the truth? And the master said, your original mind is the way. And the disciple asked, should I seek for it? Then the master said, if you seek for it, it will move away. Then the disciple was just confused. Okay, if I don't move towards it, how can I get knowledge of it? Then the master said, the way doesn't belong to knowing or not knowing. Knowing is delusion. You're deceiving yourself that this is something that you can grasp through the limited boundaries of the mind. Not knowing is also a delusion. That is just a mere blank consciousness. No inner transformation has happened. No inner insight has been awakened. It belongs to neither knowing or not knowing. When you have truly arrived to the way, you'll find that it is as boundless as space itself. The second question is, what is the source of this fundamental essence? If it had a source, it wouldn't be a fundamental essence. I know it's become very popular amongst certain communities these days, and for a very long time to say that, oh, everything is awareness. I would question this fanatic assumption that has become very popular these days, especially among certain teachers who are running around saying, okay, your original nature is awareness, the whole universe is awareness. It has a certain truth to it, but it's only true as far as your own inner experience is concerned. Because tell me, have you ever had an experience beyond your own consciousness? No, nobody has ever had an experience beyond his own consciousness. Thoughts are arising and subsiding, emotions are arising and subsiding, impressions are coming and going in millions, and it's all happening within the field of your awareness. At that level it is true. But to say that everything is awareness would be again to impose a limiting quality on this divine nature. Because what is awareness? What is it that's required in awareness? It means to be aware of something. Consciousness means to be conscious of something. Even if it is just simply consciousness of itself, it still means to be conscious of something. This implies a division amongst itself. And your own divine nature cannot possibly be divided amongst itself. To say that our divine nature is awareness, it's not different than saying that that the divine is a supreme being with a personality who gets jealous, who likes, who has dislikes, who loves, who hates, who gets envious. You're falling back again into the same pattern of projecting something in your own image. And whatever you think it is, that's not it. The moment you think you have grasped it, in a split moment, you've already missed it. Perhaps one of the most insightful statements that has ever been said in the whole history of humanity was said by Lao Tzu. He said, the Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. So if you call it consciousness, that's not it. If you call it God, whatever we mean by God, that's not it. The mind has almost inexhaustible ways of trying to force everything into the boundaries of its knowledge. And here's the thing, the moment truth becomes included as a part of your knowledge, you've imposed a limitation upon it. But asked from another angle, is awareness divine? Definitely. There's nothing in existence which is not divine. Awareness is divine. Also, unawareness is divine. The trees are divine, the mountains are divine, the stars are divine, the moon, the sun, the earth, every grain of sand on the earth, every atom of this existence. Nothing else exists except the divine. And can the divine be aware of itself? Yes. If it manifests itself through life, then that's what is happening. The divine is being aware of itself. Right now, it's the divine which is seeing through your eyes, hearing through your ears, smelling through your nose, tasting through your tongue. Yes, awareness is divine. And can the divine become aware of itself? Yes, if it manifests itself through life. And this is such an enormous miracle. Just think about it, that energy evolved to the point where it could become conscious of itself. This is such a tremendous miracle that somehow the universe started becoming aware of itself, that some spark of intelligence started blossoming within that energy. And that spark of intelligence has always been there, in a potential form. Because what is this original nature? Pure potential energy from which a field of infinite possibilities are born. And what is the source of this fundamental, coming back to your question, what is the source of this fundamental energy? It has no source. It is its own source. It reminds me of a symbol of one cannibalistic snake devouring its own tail. This is exactly what it's indicating, that in all directions the divine nature is swallowing itself. It is inescapable. And this is the insight that becomes awakened in an enlightened consciousness, that that which is divine is simply inescapable. When we look outwardly into the world and we see many different forms, these are just appearances of things being different. But once you start seeing through your own clear-seeing eyes, you'll find that all these different forms are none other than a manifestation of one fundamental energy, which is its own source, without beginning and without end. And the third question is, what is it which is aware of all this? I sort of answered this already. The snake devours its own tail.
Namaste. So, I have these three questions that has been presented to me, and the first question says, what is the common foundational substance that all things break down into? That common foundational substance is consciousness itself. I would say that consciousness is the very DNA of all phenomenon. All phenomena breaks down into consciousness. I will go further to say something about it. We can take the example even of dreaming also. You can go to bed, and in your very small bedroom, let's say, you can have dreams that are boundless in space. Maybe you are traveling through the Sahara Desert or through the Himalayas or in some huge city, meeting people. And in the dream, it can occur just as it does in the waking state, that you meet beings from different nationalities, different races, speaking different languages than you do. You don't have a monopoly. You cannot say, this is my dream, therefore I should understand the different languages. You don't understand any of the languages. And if you had to understand the language, you would have to go to a dream language school and study for 6 dream months in order to speak this dream language. So it is just like the waking state in some way. But when you wake up, all this you will see is a dream. All the people there, all the different races, nationalities, the mountains, the rivers, the ocean, the cities, the identities, all of them collapse and are no more. What are they made out of? You can say they are made out of dream material. And what is this dream material? It is a substance out of which all perception arises, and this I call consciousness. Your second question, what is the source of this foundational substance? So the first answer I gave you is consciousness is the common foundational substance that all things reduce to. They break down to that. Now, your second question, what is the source of this foundational substance? The source of this foundational substance, which is consciousness itself, must arise out of pure consciousness, or what I sometimes refer to as absolute awareness itself. The consciousness out of which all phenomena derive their phenomenality is consciousness, which is the dynamic aspect of the absolute or pure consciousness, which we call awareness itself. But awareness, this unmanifest awareness, there is no duality in it. But out of this non-dualistic pure substratum, you may say, or the absolute awareness, some movement arises in it, and that is the seed consciousness out of which the manifest world can appear. So all of this again reduces to that ultimate consciousness, that supreme awareness itself. Your third question, what is aware of all of this? Okay. What is aware of all of this? Awareness of all the things that I've mentioned. That awareness of them occur in pure, unmoving awareness itself. So somehow you may say, you can call it the intellect of the consciousness, you may say like this, but I'd rather say that simply perceiving of all phenomena, even the most subtle to the most gross, occurs to awareness itself. But awareness, the absolute awareness, has nothing to gain from such perception. So again, if I can go back from the first question, all these questions are linked. They are in some way, I would say, a little bit like an antenna is a good metaphor. An antenna that extends. You may say that the absolute and the total thing is one unit. It is the antenna represents this totality. But out of this antenna, the first extension, you may say, is consciousness. Then you extend further and you come into mind or diversity, like this. Now, whether the antenna is fully extended or contracted, it is always still just the whole thing. So let's say that the wholeness is the absolute. So from this example that I'm giving, therefore everything, including the temporary images in consciousness, the consciousness itself through which they appear, and that perceives them, and that which perceives the consciousness, are all the play of one totality. You can say like this. One is the manifest aspect as consciousness and mind and duality, and then the unmanifest aspect I call the pure absolute awareness itself. So I hope this answers your three questions to some satisfaction. Thank you.
What's the common foundational substance that all things break down into? What is the source of this foundational substance? And who exactly is the reference?
choice or take your own path? What is your decision? How will you decide? Well, you know what? Let's get down to the core. Amazing how nothing remains the same. Enlightenment was a cure to what man's pain. A spiritual quest, 1,000 miles through the shadowlands. Fight the non-believers with the mind, not the hands. A struggle with opinions of negative views. Choose the righteous path, maybe the right path. Who cares about getting snooped or disrespected for a choice that felt right? The value of peace is much better. A social misfit wasn't the right outfit. Evil anxieties can be crushed. Remember, the positive and negative is in all of us. No need to feel lost, there's a vibe. Energy surrounds us, whether it's good or bad. Inhale, take a deep breath. Now the next step, to make the right choice on this spiritual quest. Travel the world to find the answer. The journey may take a long time. Stay focused with peace in the mind. Let's hope you find the road to enlightenment. So where does a man stand in the face of dilemma? That's a question you have to ask yourself. Hell on earth, it's hard not to curse in this unbalanced universe. Destroy those inner demons with a skill similar to Kung Fu. Remember, use that power for good. Assured of confidence, repels these suckers, these sins. No religious contract, but holy with a capital H. Let's get this straight. Research. Research is what harvests knowledge in the first place. So why hate on someone else's fate? It's such a waste. No need to feel this, there's a vibe. Energy surrounds us, whether it's good or bad. Inhale, take a deep breath. Now the next step, to make the right choice on this spiritual quest. Travel the world to find the answer. The journey may take a long time. Stay focused with peace in the mind. Let's hope you find the road to enlightenment. Turn water into wine, wine into soul, soul into gold. Some miracles can't be real though. No. And if the temptation of flesh fondles your head, you might as well release it. But that's against the holy law. If you do that, you might not get to the holy law. All I got to say is be yourself. Stay real like Eric Sermon said. Be true to faith. Why chop and change? Christian to a dread. Some of us get misled in the midst of confusion. Yes. So why go with the hype? If you're really holy, just keep it real, just keep it tight. It's up to you to choose your own path. Which path are you gonna take? Are you gonna choose to be holy because you want to be holy? Or are you gonna be choosing to be holy because someone else tells you? And they're telling you that if you're not, then it's wrong. You need to choose your own path, make your own decisions. If you feel that it's inside you to have that inner spirit, then choose the right path. Good luck on the road to your life.